My friend, listen, there is a secret, a mystery, a hidden key that turns the lock of a life not merely endured, but ignited. You were never called to the ordinary. You were never formed in the image of mediocrity. You were not born to merely exist. You were crafted by the hands that carved the stars, woven by the word that spoke the cosmos into being. You were not made to echo the world. You were made to reflect heaven. Before you were formed in the womb, you were known. Not just noticed, not just observed from afar, but known intimately, intentionally, eternally. The hands that formed the oceans traced the pattern of your soul. The voice that thundered at Sinai also whispered your name before time began. You are not an accident in the cosmos. You are a purpose wrapped in flesh. That is the foundation. That is where the dynamic life begins. Not in what you can accomplish, not in how high you climb or how much you gain, but in realizing who you are and whose image you bear. And yet, this is the first thing we forget. The world rushes in with names that are not yours. It calls you failure when you fall. It calls you unworthy when you stumble. It calls you forgotten when you walk through silence. But the world did not create you, and so the world does not get to name you. The voice of the world is loud, but it is not true. There is another voice, deeper than sound, more ancient than the stars, and that voice says you are chosen. That voice says you are royal, set apart, a vessel of glory. Set apart. That voice calls you not by your mistake, but by your destiny. The voice of the one who knit you together calls you not servant, but child. But to live dynamically, you must come out from under the false names. You cannot walk in the power of heaven while agreeing with the labels of earth. You cannot move mountains if you believe you are meant to stay in the valley. You cannot reign in the spirit if you still live as a slave to fear. Identity is not merely the starting line. It is the very fuel of divine movement. When you know you are a child of the King, you begin to live like it. You stop asking permission to dream. You stop apologizing for being set apart. You begin to walk into rooms knowing that heaven walks with you. This is not pride. It is alignment. It is agreement with the truth of the one who made you. And that truth changes everything. When Moses stood at the burning bush, he asked, "Who am I?" But God didn't answer the question the way Moses expected. He didn't say, "You are strong" or "You are ready." Instead, he said, "I will be with you." In other words, your identity is not rooted in your qualifications. It is rooted in my presence. When the great I Am is with you, your I am not has no longer matter. The dynamic life is lived by those who stop defining themselves by their past and start defining themselves by his promise. You are not the sum of your failures. You are not a collection of wounds. You are not what was spoken over you by voices of shame. You are who he says you are. And he says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. He says you are his workmanship, his poem, his masterpiece. You are crafted with intention and called with fire. You were made for movement, not stagnation. You were made for glory, not survival. You were made to bear fruit, to shine, to stand, to run. But the enemy knows the power of identity. That's why his first attack is always to question it. In the garden, did God really say? In the wilderness. If you are the Son of God, the strategy has not changed. Because if he can confuse your identity, he can confuse your destiny. If he can get you to live like a slave, you'll never step into the authority of a son. If he can get you to believe you're broken beyond repair, you'll never offer your life as a vessel for miracles. That's why identity is not a luxury. It's a battleground. And if you are in Christ, then your very identity is under constant assault. But it is also sealed. Abraham had to lift the knife before he saw the ram. Moses had to stretch out his hand before the sea split. Elijah had to pour out water before the fire fell. Surrender always precedes the supernatural. The sacred exchange is always the doorway to divine power. You lay down what is natural, and you receive what is holy. You give up control and gain communion. You empty yourself and are filled with the fullness of God. There is no resurrection without the cross. There is no glory without the surrender. But in that place of giving all, you find the life that can never be taken, the strength that never runs dry, and the power that turns ordinary dust into a divine instrument. The Spirit cannot fill what is already full of self. The breath of God does not rest on clenched fists. It rests on open hands. It rests on open hands. I can see. The moment you stop clinging, the moment you stop striving, the moment you let go of the need to be everything, do everything, fix everything, that is the moment heaven steps in. That is the moment the exchange is made. your weakness for his strength, your burden for his rest, your chaos for his peace, your striving for his anointing. And that anointing breaks yokes, heals wounds, opens doors no man can shut, and causes you to walk in places you never dreamed you could walk. The dynamic life is not forged in ease or comfort, but in the furnace of the wilderness. It is in the dry places, the lonely places, the places where nothing seems to grow, that the deepest roots of power and purpose are formed. The wilderness is not the absence of God. It is often the place of his most intimate work. When everything familiar is stripped away, when the noise of the world fades into silence, it is there that the voice of the Lord becomes unmistakably clear. The wilderness is not a punishment. It is a preparation. It is not the rejection of destiny. It is the pathway to it. Every man or woman who has ever lived a life of impact has first walked through the valley where nothing seemed to make sense. Abraham had to leave everything and walk into the unknown. Joseph had to sit in the pit before he ever sat on a throne. David learned to fight giants, not on a battlefield, but in the solitude of shepherds' fields. The wilderness is not where purpose dies. It is where it is revealed. It exposes what is false and refines what is real. It strips away the lesser things so that the greater calling can rise to the surface. There are seasons when the ground beneath your feet feels dry, when your prayers feel unanswered, and when heaven seems silent. But that silence is not abandonment. It is often an invitation to go deeper, to lean in, to let your roots stretch into the depths of trust. Trees that only know rain never grow strong roots, but those that endure drought stretch down into hidden places to find what others cannot reach. That is what the wilderness does. It teaches you how to draw from the wells beneath the surface. It teaches you to live not by what you see, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. It is in the wilderness that idols are shattered. The things we trusted more than we realized are exposed for what they are. The applause of people, the illusion of control, the security of routine, all of it begins to fall away. And in that place of exposure, the soul is finally ready to encounter the glory that doesn't depend on externals. The wilderness confronts you with yourself. It forces you to see what you believe, what you fear, what you cling to. But more than that, it forces you to see God as he truly is, not just as a provider of blessings, but as the blessing himself. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, not because God had forgotten them, but because they had to unlearn the mindset of slavery before they could step into the inheritance of freedom. You can be out of Egypt and still carry Egypt. You can be called but still think like a captive. The wilderness is where those patterns are broken. It is where God rewrites the scripts of limitation, fear, and doubt. It is where identity is shaped and faith is forged. The dynamic life is not immune to hardship. In fact, it requires it. It is in the crushing of the olive that the oil is released. It is in the pressing of the grape that the wine begins to flow. There are revelations that can only come through trial. There are dimensions of God's character that can only be known when you have nothing else to lean on. In the wilderness, he becomes not just the God of your theology, but the God of your survival. Not just the one you speak of, but the one you cling to. Even Jesus, before stepping into the fullness of his earthly ministry, was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. It was not a detour, it was a divine necessity. There he fasted, there he was tested, there he faced the enemy head on, and there he emerged in the power of the Spirit. The dynamic life is not about escaping struggle, but embracing what it produces. Fire refines, wind strengthens, drought deepens. And all of it prepares you to carry more than you ever could in comfort. The wilderness is holy ground. It is where burning bushes appear, where manna falls from heaven, where water gushes from rocks, and where the voice of the Lord thunders from mountaintops. It is where the old dies and the new is born. It is the in-between, the space between what was and what will be. And in that space, the soul learns to trust without proof, to hope without guarantee, and to walk by faith when sight is nowhere to be found. The dynamic life is not built in the palace. It is birthed in the wild, shaped by hunger, and fueled by the fire of encounter. The dynamic life is not lived by chance, but by clarity, not by drifting, but by divine direction. It is the life that understands the weight of a moment and the echo of eternity. It is the life that walks through today with eyes fixed on what is unseen, ears tuned to a frequency not of this world. This life is not consumed by the temporary, not tangled in the dust of passing things. It is rooted in the eternal even while moving through the present. It walks in time but listens to eternity's clock. It understands that each breath carries a purpose, and each step leaves an imprint that stretches beyond the limits of earthbound years. Oh. To live dynamically is to carry the kingdom inside of you while living in a world that denies it. It is to dwell in the now but build for the forever. The dynamic life does not waste the hours, does not bury the talents, does not sleep through the harvest. It understands that the smallest act done in the Spirit carries eternal consequence. It understands that this world is not home, but an assignment, not the destination, but the proving ground. The dynamic soul rises each morning not to merely survive the day, but to sanctify it. To seize it with holy intention, knowing that the clock of heaven is always moving, and the time to act is always now. The one who lives for eternity does not measure life the way others do. While the world chases comfort, the dynamic heart chases calling. While others seek applause, the dynamic one seeks alignment. Success is not found in fame or fortune, but in obedience. Legacy is not defined by monuments, but by faithfulness. The dynamic life may appear ordinary to the eyes of man, but it shakes the unseen realms with every obedient yes, every surrendered moment, every hidden act of love. It does not wait for stages or spotlights. It understands that the eternal is often hidden, that the greatest battles are fought in secret, and that God sees what man never does. This kind of life lives with urgency, not because of fear, but because of vision. It sees that time is short, that eternity is vast, and that what is done now matters forever. It is the life that speaks when silence would be easier, that stands when compromise would be more comfortable. It is the life that chooses the narrow path when the broad road calls. It says no to what is good in order to say yes to what is God. It understands that moments come wrapped in disguise, and that some of the greatest doors look like interruptions, inconveniences, or impossibilities. But the dynamic soul has eyes trained to see the divine in the daily, to discern the sacred hidden within the ordinary. It walks with the awareness that every conversation could be a divine appointment. Every setback is set up for something greater. It remembers that seeds planted in tears will one day be reaped in joy, that prayers whispered in the dark are heard in the halls of heaven, that the smallest light still pierces the deepest night. The dynamic life does not retreat when resistance comes. It knows that resistance means you're moving. That friction means there's fire. That opposition means you are advancing. To live dynamically is to live with a heart both broken and burning. Broken for the things that break the heart of God, and burning with the fire that cannot be quenched. It is to be in the world but not of it, to carry the aroma of heaven in a world that reeks of despair. It is to walk into chaos with peace, to walk into confusion with clarity, to walk into hopelessness with unshakable joy. The dynamic life does not wait for perfect circumstances. It invades imperfection with perfect love. And while the world is obsessed with what can be seen and touched and owned, the dynamic life knows that the unseen is more real than the seen. That what is eternal outweighs what is temporal. That the treasures of heaven are not stored in banks or vaults, but in souls, in sacrifices, in surrendered moments. The dynamic life invests in the only currency that will never lose value, obedience to the will of God. It counts the cost and pays it willingly. It understands that to gain the eternal, something in the now must be laid down. Every day becomes sacred. Every step becomes strategic. Every breath becomes a song of surrender. This is not a life of rules and rituals, but a life of revelation and rhythm. It listens for the still, small voice. It watches for the cloud the size of a man's hand. It leans into mystery, walks through fire, and builds with eternity in mind. Because the dynamic life is not a sprint, it is a pilgrimage, not a performance, but a procession toward a kingdom not built by human hands. There is a fire that does not burn out, a passion that does not dim with age or season, a strength that does not come from the flesh but flows from the Spirit. The dynamic life is a life lived in that fire. It is not maintained by hype or emotion, but by holy intimacy. It is not sparked by the noise of a crowd, but by the whisper in the secret place. The dynamic life is not a performance. It is a flame. And the flame must be tended. It must be fed with the oil of devotion, guarded from the winds of distraction, and stirred by the breath of heaven. You were never meant to live in cycles of burnout and revival, high moments followed by long seasons of numbness. You were meant to burn continually. Just as the flame on the altar was never to go out, so the fire in your spirit was not meant to flicker. But it cannot be sustained on yesterday's manna. It cannot be carried on yesterday's touch. The dynamic life is lived in daily encounter, daily surrender, daily filling. You cannot live a supernatural life on natural means. You must drink deeply of the Spirit. You must learn the rhythm of abiding, the posture of dependence, the hunger that refuses to be satisfied with anything less than His presence. The world is loud. It shouts with endless distractions. Stop. It pulls you in 1,000 directions, offers you counterfeit fires, fires that burn bright but that quickly, fires of ambition, fires of entertainment, fires of empty affirmation. They promise much but leave ashes in your soul. The dynamic life turns away from those fires. It seeks the fire that Moses saw, the bush that burned but was not consumed. That is the fire of the Spirit. It does not destroy you. It transforms you. It does not exhaust you. It renews you. It does not flicker with mood or circumstance. It blazes with the breath of God. To live dynamically is to live filled. Filled not once, not occasionally, but continually. Be being filled, the scripture says. It is a flow, not a moment. A stream, not a splash. Just as a lamp must constantly be refilled with oil, so your heart must constantly return to the source. Not out of obligation, but out of desperation. Not because you are earning anything, but because without Him you have nothing. Without the oil, the lamp is just a shell. Without the fire, the altar is just wood and stone. But when the Spirit comes, the ordinary becomes holy. The natural becomes supernatural. The surrendered becomes powerful. The dynamic life refuses complacency. It does not coast, it does not settle. It is marked by hunger, by thirst, by a refusal to become numb. It cries out in the night. It lifts hands when there are no answers. It worships when nothing makes sense. It kneels when the flesh wants to rise. Because it understands that the fire is not an accessory. It is the very breath of life. Without it, all our efforts are dust. Without it, we move but go nowhere, speak but carry no power, act but bear no fruit. But when the fire falls, everything changes. Words carry weight, steps are ordered, walls crumble, chains break, and the presence of God becomes more real than the air around us. But the fire is not given to entertain. It is given to empower. It is not for the mountaintop alone. It is for the battlefield. The dynamic life does not seek fire for fire's sake. It seeks fire to carry it, to carry His name, to carry His glory, to carry His love into the darkest places. The fire is not for us to keep. It is for us to release. We are called to be burning ones, walking torches of His light, living altars where the world can see that God is not distant, not silent, not indifferent. He is here. He is alive. And He still answers by fire. The world is waiting not for another opinion, not for another strategy, but for a people who burn, a people whose eyes shine with eternity, whose voices tremble with truth, whose hearts beat with holy conviction, a people who don't just speak of God, but reflect Him, who don't just visit the secret place, but live from it, who don't just carry a message, but become the message. The dynamic life is not a concept to admire, it's a fire to walk in. And that fire spreads. It touches families, cities, nations. It leaps over walls, breaks through ceilings, sets dry bones on fire again. The flame is not just for you. It is for the world through you. The dynamic life is a life of purpose. And purpose is not something you stumble upon in the comfort of the familiar. It is something you awaken to in the tension between the seen and the unseen. It is the pull that calls you beyond yourself, the whisper that says there is more than what your eyes can see. The dynamic life is not satisfied with existence. It does not drift. It does not wait for life to hand it meaning. It rises each morning with a commission, not because the day is easy, but because the call is eternal. It understands that the moments of life are not random. They are divine assignments wrapped in ordinary skin. Purpose is not found in chasing your own dreams. It is discovered in aligning with the dream of God. It is not the pursuit of success, but the surrender to significance. You can live your whole life climbing ladders that lead nowhere, building towers that reach the sky, but have no foundation. But when you step into divine purpose, you are no longer chasing the wind. You are following the breath of God. Every step matters. Every act becomes sacred. Every moment is redeemed by intention, because purpose transforms time from something to spend into something to sow. The dynamic life lives with the knowledge that you were created for a reason, shaped in the secret place for such a time as this. You were not born by accident. You were not formed at random. The fingerprints of heaven are all over your story. Even the broken places, even the chapters that felt wasted, Nothing is beyond redemption in the hands of the author. Purpose takes the shattered and turns it into strategy. It turns pain into power, trials into training grounds. When you live with purpose, your past no longer defines you. It equips you. Your wounds no longer disqualify you. They prepare you. The very things the enemy meant to destroy you become the tools by which you will bring deliverance to others. To live dynamically is to walk with the awareness that you are on assignment. Not just in the pulpit or on a platform, but in every space your feet touch. Your workplace becomes a mission field. Your home becomes a sanctuary. The street corner, the grocery store, the hospital waiting room, all of it becomes holy ground when you walk in with purpose. Because you understand that you carry the kingdom with you. You carry light into darkness. You carry peace into chaos. You carry hope into despair. You are not just going through life. You are sent into it. You are a vessel, a carrier of something greater than yourself. But purpose is not always loud. It does not always look like something great in the eyes of men. Sometimes purpose is wrapped in obscurity. Sometimes it is found in consistency. In showing up. In serving when no one sees. In choosing integrity when compromise would be easier. The dynamic life doesn't need the spotlight to shine. It shines because it is connected to the source. It understands that the one who called you is watching even when the world is not. And in that hidden place, God is building something eternal. Purpose brings focus. It burns away the distractions. It silences the noise of comparison. It frees you from the tyranny of trying to be everything to everyone. When you know your purpose, you can say no without guilt. You can walk away from what looks good because you are waiting for what is God. You don't chase every open door. You walk through the ones you were made for. Because not every opportunity is an assignment. And not every platform is meant to carry your voice. The dynamic life discerns the difference. It waits for the prompting. It listens for the leading. It moves when heaven says move. Purpose also brings endurance. When you know why you're running, you don't quit when it gets hard. You don't stop when the applause fades. You don't faint when the journey gets long. Because you're not running for the approval of man. You're running toward a crown that will never fade. You endure because the calling is greater than the cost. You press on because the weight of glory far outweighs the trials of the moment. You keep going because you've seen the glimpse of what could be, and you refuse to settle for what is. And when you live with purpose, your life begins to echo. Not just in this generation, but in the ones to come. You sow seeds that you may never see bloom. You speak words that outlive your voice. You leave behind more than memories. You leave behind impact. The dynamic life builds something that will not burn when the fire comes, something that will stand when the shaking begins. It does not live for the fleeting applause of men, but for the eternal reward of the King.